Before we begin, welcome to Still Missing. We dig into the world's most haunting unsolved cases. New episodes every week. Subscribe so you don't miss a single case. In October 2013, police in Nottinghamshire, England, began digging in the back garden of a small, ordinary-looking house on Blenheim, close in the town of Mansfield. What they found, buried beneath the lawn, would reveal one of the most disturbing and sustained acts of deception in modern British criminal history. Under the earth, wrapped in sleeping bags and blankets, lay the skeletal remains of William and Patricia Wycherley, an elderly married couple who had not been seen by anyone outside their family since May 1998. For 15 years. Their children, Susan and Christopher Edwards, had maintained the fiction that William and Patricia were still alive. They forged letters in their parents' handwriting. They called relatives and neighbors, pretending to relay messages. They sent Christmas cards signed with their parents' names. They called the Department for Work and Pensions to report changes of address. And most crucially, they continued to collect William and Patricia's government pensions, a total of nearly £200,000, over the 15-year period, all while the bodies lay buried in the garden, just meters from the back door. William Wycherley was 85 years old at the time of his death. Patricia was 63. They were a quiet, reclusive couple who kept largely to themselves. They lived in a modest terraced house and had few close friends or social contacts outside their family. This isolation would prove critical to the success of their children's deception. With so few people checking on the Wycherleys, the absence of the actual living couple was surprisingly easy to conceal. Susan Edwards was 56 at the time of her arrest in 2013. Her husband Christopher was 57. They had lived a quiet, unremarkable life in Dagenham, east of London. To their neighbors, they appeared normal, if somewhat eccentric, with an intense interest in old Hollywood films and memorabilia. The story of what happened in May 1998 emerged during the police investigation and subsequent trial. According to the prosecution, Susan Edwards visited her parents' home on the May bank holiday weekend. The relationship between Susan and her parents, particularly her mother Patricia, had been strained for years. Patricia was described as a difficult, controlling, and at times cruel woman. She had a turbulent relationship with Susan and had allegedly interfered in Susan's marriage. The prosecution argued that during this visit, a confrontation erupted. Susan shot both her parents, William, in the upper body, Patricia in the back, using a World War II revolver that had belonged to William. Susan maintained she acted in response to a sudden threat from her father, but the prosecution argued that the shot to Patricia's back indicated a deliberate, cold-blooded act. After the killings, Susan and Christopher faced a decision. They chose concealment. Working together, they wrapped the bodies in sleeping bags, carried them into the back garden, and buried them in a shallow grave beneath the lawn. They then cleaned the house and began the long process of assuming control of the Wycherleys' identities. Christopher proved remarkably skilled at forgery. He practiced William and Patricia's handwriting until he could reproduce it convincingly. He drafted letters to relatives, to government agencies, and to the bank. Susan handled the social side, maintaining contact with relatives, deflecting questions, and creating a plausible narrative about the elderly couple's declining health and desire for privacy. The deception was extraordinarily thorough. When relatives called, the Edwards told them William and Patricia had become reclusive and didn't want visitors. When government agencies requested proof of life for pension purposes, Christopher forged the documents. When neighbors asked, they were told the Wycherleys had moved away or were in poor health. On occasion, Susan would send Christmas and birthday cards signed in her parents' names, complete with personalized messages that convincingly mimicked their writing styles. The scheme unraveled in 2012, not because of detective work or a tip-off, but because of money. The Edwards had been spending well beyond their means. In addition to the pension money, they had emptied the Wycherleys' bank accounts and sold their parents' investments. Much of this money was spent on Susan's passion, collecting rare Hollywood memorabilia. Autographed photographs of Gary Cooper, Betty Davis, Frank Sinatra, and other Golden Age celebrities. She attended memorabilia auctions regularly and was known among dealers as a dedicated and sometimes aggressive buyer. Christopher's spending focused on rare books and first editions. Together, they had accumulated a collection worth tens of thousands of pounds, all funded by dead people's pensions. What makes the Wycherley case unique is not the violence it was. By the standards of murder, a relatively straightforward double homicide. What makes it extraordinary is what came after. 15 years of performance. 15 years of Christmas cards from dead parents. 15 years of forged signatures, redirected pensions, and carefully managed lies. By day, they were mild-mannered pensioners. By auction day, they were dedicated collectors, moving through the world of vintage Hollywood memorabilia with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. All of it funded by the two bodies, rotting quietly in a garden in Mansfield. When they could no longer meet their financial obligations, they attempted to sell the house on Blenheim Close, the very house under which the bodies were buried. They approached a solicitor to handle the property sale. Using forged power of attorney documents that purported to be signed by William Wycherley, the solicitor became suspicious. A 99-year-old man selling his house through a power of attorney, who could not be reached by phone or contacted in person, raised red flags. The solicitor referred the matter to the authorities. In late 2013, police began investigating. They quickly discovered that no one had physically seen William or Patricia Wycherley for 15 years. Medical records showed no doctor visits, no hospital admissions, no prescriptions filled, nothing to indicate either person was still alive. On October 31, 2013, Halloween police excavated the back garden and discovered the remains. Susan and Christopher Edwards were arrested. Christopher cooperated and confessed to his role in the cover-up, though he insisted Susan had pulled the trigger. In June 2014, both were found guilty of murder at Nottingham Crown Court. Susan received a minimum of 25 years. Christopher received the same, the judge noting that, while he may not have pulled the trigger, his 15 years of active cover-up demonstrated a sustained partnership in crime. The judge described the case as one of cold, calculated, and sustained deceit on a massive scale. The house on Blenheim Close was sold after the trial. The garden where William and Patricia lay for a decade and a half has been re-landscaped. The new owners reportedly knew about the history before purchasing. Mansfield has moved on, but the case remains a disturbing reminder that sometimes the most elaborate crimes don't involve master criminals or sophisticated technology just to quiet people. A garden, and the terrifying patience to pretend for 15 years that nothing ever happened. Next week, Australia, 1966.3. Children take a bus to the beach on Australia Day. They're seen playing with a tall, blonde stranger. They never come home. Their parents kept the same phone number for 53 years, hoping for a call that never came. The Beaumont children, don't miss it. 15 years of forged signatures. 2 bodies under the lawn. How do 2 ordinary people maintain a lie that enormous for that long? And what would finally break them? Tell me what you think in the comments. If this case kept you watching to the end, hit like, subscribe, and help the algorithm find more stories like this one. This is Still Missing. Some cases never close.